USPAP 7-hour national update course 2022 through 2023, Chapter 2, Fair Housing Update, Critical New Information for Appraisers, page 21. USPAP references. USPAP references that are relevant to the material on disparate impact include definition of intended user, lines 127 through 128. The client and any other party as identified, that's highlighted, by name or type as users of the appraisal or appraisal review report by the appraiser, that's highlighted, based communication with the client at the time of the assignment. Standards Rule 2-2 A2, lines 597 through 599. A party receiving a copy of an appraisal report in order to satisfy disclosure requirements does not become an intended user of the appraisal unless the appraiser identifies such party as an identified user as part of the assignment. End of page. Quiz. Number 1. In a disparate impact discrimination case, a plaintiff does not have to show. I'm just going to haul ass through this and I'm going to review it because I'm on a timer. Ready, set, go. A legal argument that B, anyone was harmed. C, discriminatory intent by the other party. Or D, a negative outcome for a protected class. I don't know if I got it right, because you're on a fucking timer. Number 2, a lender is required by the Equal Opportunity Act to provide a mortgage borrower with a copy of the appraisal report that was performed on the property. Does this make the borrower an intended user of the appraisal according to USPAP? A lender is required by the Equal Credit Opportunity Act to provide a mortgage borrower with a copy of the appraisal report that was performed on the property. Does this make the borrower an intended user of the appraisal? I'm going to go no. Yeah, no. You answered that one correctly. I don't know if I passed that test because I didn't get to review the first one. Anyways, page 22. Enforcement of FHACT and ECOA. While the FHACT was enacted in 1968 and amended in 1988, and ECOA was enacted in 1974, laws related to fair housing and fair lending continue to evolve and change, and sometimes interpretations of them also change. In other words, even if the law does not change, the interpretation and enforcement of that law may change. Here's an example. In February 2021, HUD Directive 21-021 refers to the department's legal conclusion, that's highlighted, that the Fair Housing Act's sex discrimination provisions are comparable in text and purpose to those of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act in the workplace. The memo also stated HUD has now determined, that's highlighted, that the Fair Housing Act's prohibition on sex discrimination in housing likewise includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Given the depth of the laws, the scope of the interpretations, and the various executive orders and regulations that can have an impact on their enforcement, it is beyond the scope of USPAP to provide an appraiser with specific guidance on complying with each individual law interpretation, executive order, and regulation. However, it is important to know and understand the foundational anti-discrimination laws, including FHA, CT, and ECOA, and be prepared to comply with these laws in all situations within appraisal practice and while operating your appraisal business, even though USPAP only addresses appraisal practice and not business practice. The laws and/or their interpretations can change during a time when USPAP is in effect. Thus, USPAP will always direct the appraiser to fulfill their professional responsibility to know and apply applicable FHA, CT, and ECOA laws. The appraiser must personally take the responsibility to fully understand their obligations to fair housing and anti-discrimination laws. USPAP cannot tell the appraiser which laws to comply with, since the answer will vary by assignment. Additional guidance material can be found in Appendix E of the downloadable material for this chapter. There's your link right there. CFPB has reached a similar conclusion. CCFPB clarifies that discrimination by lenders on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is illegal. And there's the link for that. The Bureau believes that even though the term sex is not defined in ECOA or Regulation B, the prohibitions against discrimination on the basis of sex under ECOA and Regulation B are correctly interpreted to include discrimination based on sexual orientation and/or gender identity. End of page, 34%. Page 23, USPAP references. Relevant USPAP references in discussing enforcement of FHA, CT, and ECOA include Competency Rule, lines 311 through 313. Competency may apply to factors such as, but not limited to, an appraiser's familiarity with a specific type of property or asset, a market, a geographic area, an intended use, specific laws and regulations, that's highlighted, or an analytical method. Standards Rule 1-1A, lines 436 to 449. In developing a real property appraisal, an appraiser must A. Be aware of, understand, and correctly employ those recognized methods and techniques that are necessary to produce a credible appraisal. Comment. This standards rule recognizes that the principle of change continues to affect the manner in which appraisers perform appraisal services. Changes and developments in the real estate field have a substantial impact on the appraisal profession. Important changes in the cost and manner of constructing and marketing commercial, industrial, and residential real estate, as well as changes in the legal framework in which real property rights and interests are created, conveyed, and mortgaged, that was highlighted, have resulted in corresponding changes in appraisal theory and practice. Social change, that's highlighted, has also had an effect on appraisal theory and practice. To keep abreast of these changes and developments, the appraisal profession is constantly reviewing and revising appraisal methods and techniques and devising new methods and techniques to meet new circumstances. For this reason, it is not sufficient for appraisers to simply maintain the skills and knowledge they possess when they become appraisers. Each appraiser must continuously improve, that's highlighted, his or her skills to remain proficient, that's highlighted, in real property appraisal. End of page, 34%. Quiz number 1. With regard to fair housing laws and regulations, USPAP. Okay, I'm going to try to haul ass through this and hopefully they'll let me review it. With regard to fair housing laws and regulations, USPAP, I think, isn't responsible or some shit like that. Ready, set, go. A, does not establish an express prohibition on bias and discrimination. B, provides a list of fair housing laws that are applicable in any given assignment. C, supersedes the requirements that are set forth in these laws. Or D, requires the appraiser to recognize and comply with the laws that are applicable. I'm going to go D. Yeah, you got it right. All right, so remember, with regard to fair housing laws and regulations, USPAP, you said, requires the appraiser to recognize and comply with laws that are applicable. And that was correct. Page 24. Lender guidance on fair housing. Fair lending and fair housing laws can apply to residential real property appraisers, commercial appraisers, personal property appraisers, and business appraisers. They also apply to many of the clients of appraisal services, many of whom also issue guidance for appraisers on the subject. This client-issued guidance under USPAP can be an example of one of the assignment elements an appraiser needs to identify to be able to correctly solve the appraisal problem. For many real property appraisal assignments, these client-issued guidelines become, under USPAP, assignment conditions. Appraisers should be aware that while such assignment conditions may impose additional obligations on an appraiser, they do not supersede the requirements of the FHA, CT, or ECOA. For example, entities and federal agencies such as Fannie Mae, FHA, VA, etc., issue their own guidelines for real property appraisers, which most often include direct references to fair housing laws and suggested application of methodologies and techniques associated with those laws. An appraiser would not follow every guideline from every entity or federal agency at the same time. Rather, the appraiser would follow the guidelines applicable to the particular assignment as well as all applicable laws. A nuanced detail to this statement is explained in USPAP under the Scope of Work Rule, lines 382 through 401, which explains the appraiser is ultimately the one responsible for scope of work decisions. End of page. Page 25. Assignment conditions. Assignment conditions are specific, that's highlighted, to each appraisal assignment. If the appraiser is working on an appraisal where the Fannie Mae guidelines are an assignment condition, the appraiser must follow them. For that reason, because there are nuisances, one of the two, I can't pronounce that are specific to the needs of each different lender client. USPAP does not dictate the exact way in which an appraiser must, for each assignment, comply with the fair housing laws applicable to the specific assignment. Each client has different information they want to know related to fair housing laws. And while lenders may have similar themes associated with the foundational laws of FHACT and ECOA, there can be differences among the lender's guidelines. In short, requirements of the FHACT and ECOA are the floor, not the ceiling. The same nuanced detail in the footnote above also applies here. End of page. Page 26, scope of work. An appraiser should remember that regardless of the assignment conditions, a client asks the appraiser to follow. The appraiser is the one who is responsible for any decisions related to scope of work. The appraiser cannot comply with assignment conditions that are discriminatory, are inappropriate, violate the law, limit necessary research, etc. Note, lender guidelines, which mean assignment conditions, related to fair housing requirements have continually improved and are typically very clear and direct. End of page. Page 27, USPAP references. USPAP references that are relevant to guidance issued by lenders and other clients include definition of assignment conditions, lines 81 through 82, assumptions, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, laws and regulations, jurisdictional exemptions, and other conditions that affect the scope of work. That's highlighted. Scope of work rule, lines 364 through 365 and 371. Identification of the problem to be solved requires the appraiser to identify that's highlighted, assignment elements, including identifying the applicable Assignment conditions. That's highlighted. Scope of work rule, lines 378 through 381. Assignment conditions include assumptions, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, laws and regulations, jurisdictional exemptions, and other conditions that affect the scope of work. That's highlighted. Laws include constitutions, legislative and court-made law, administrative rules and ordinances. Regulations include rules or orders having legal force issued by an administrative agency. Scope of work rule, lines 392 through 393. An appraiser, that's highlighted, must not allow, that's highlighted, assignment conditions to limit, that's highlighted, the scope of work to such a degree that the assignment results are not credible in the context of the intended use. End of page, 35%.